Good afternoon, and welcome to the second of our Lunch with the League series. Before we start, I'd like to make a few announcements. Please turn off your video and remain muted throughout the session. There will be a Q&A session after we hear from our speaker today, so if you have any questions for him, please put them into the chat as they occur to you and direct them to Betsy Patterson. Finally, I'd like to advise you that this session is being recorded, and the link to the recording of each session will be available on our website, and the link to the website is on the chat. So at this time, I'd like to introduce the president of our local league, Kathy Morgan, who will make a few remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920, 6 months before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, granting women their right to vote nationwide. It was established and continues today as a nonpartisan, grassroots political organization to encourage voters to become informed and active participants in our representative democracy. The League engages in many activities to ensure that our democracy works, such as registering voters, educating them about the issues and the candidates, getting out the vote during elections, as well as supporting fair and transparent elections. The goal of this Lunch and Learn series is to inform citizens about the different facets of our local government. We hope that you will find it very informative. Thank you for being here today. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, the Honorable Judge Kevin DeNoce. Welcome and thank you for being here today, Judge. Judge DeNoce is the presiding judge of the Ventura County Superior Court. He was appointed to the bench in 2007 and currently presides over general and complex civil cases. He was awarded and named Judge of the Year by the Ventura County Trial Lawyers Association in 2017 and bestowed with the KOC Public Safety Award in 2022. He has a balanced background to draw on, including over 15 years on the bench, presiding over civil, criminal, and family law cases, 11 years as a private attorney where he ran his own law firm and represented over 1,000 clients, and 9 years as a former Ventura County prosecutor. As a former senior deputy district attorney, former president of the Ventura County Deputy District Attorneys Association, and former instructor at the Ventura County Sheriff's Academy, he is acutely attuned to the issues concerning law enforcement. He has assisted in the drafting of legislation and, as an attorney, successfully argued cases before the California Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. Judge DeNoce was also the former head of the Appeals and Writs Unit for the Ventura County District Attorney Office and received the Prosecutor of the Year Award. He received his college degree from the University of Colorado at Boulder and obtained his law degree from Pepperdine University School of Law. Welcome, Judge, and thank you so much for being here today.
It's an honor and privilege to be here, and I really appreciate that long introduction and summary of my bio, and I'd love to answer any questions and inform you as to the workings of our court. We've got a very busy docket here at the Ventura Superior Court, and any questions that any of you have, I'd be honored to try and address for you.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate that. And I think one question that comes to mind is, what does it mean to be the presiding judge? How is that a different role from other judges, and what is your role in that position?
Excellent question. In Ventura County, we have 29 Superior Court judges. We actually have one vacancy, so we're expecting to have 30 in the near future. And every Superior Court in every county elects one of their judges to become the presiding judge. And my colleagues did me the honor about 6 months ago of electing me to be the presiding judge of Ventura County. And in that role, I do a number of things. I have my normal Superior Court judge job, just like every other colleague. But in addition to that, I manage and supervise the workings of the court. And in particular, what I do is I make all the judicial assignments, which is kind of an important thing to my colleagues because, as you probably know, we have a number of different departments in the courthouse. We have a criminal division, we have a civil division, we have a family law division, we have a juvenile court division, and we have a probate division. And so a decision has to be made as to which judges are going to be assigned to which department. And then additionally, I have the authority to decide which judges are going to be my supervising judges. For instance, we have a supervising judge for each of the departments that I mentioned, a criminal supervising judge, civil supervising judge, etc. So those are some of the decisions I make. And I also work closely with the court's CEO, Brenda McCormick, in terms of managing the overall structure of the court. As I mentioned, we have 29 judges, we have 4 commissioners, but then we have hundreds of court employees that work in various roles, from being judicial assistants in the courtroom or clerks in the clerk's office. And of course, we have bailiffs that are provided by the sheriff's department that provide security in our courthouse and in the courtrooms. So there's a lot of wheels turning that, as the presiding judge, you are involved in. Additionally, one of my roles by operation of law is as the presiding judge, often referred to simply as the PJ. I am the spokesperson of the court. In other words, that if something publicly needs to be said about the court, the PJ, at this time, myself, will make that statement. For instance, during the pandemic, the presiding judge had to make a lot of public statements about decisions that were being made about court closure and mask requirements when those were in effect and so forth. And those were all public pronouncements that were made by the presiding judge. So that's kind of a summary of most of my duties as a presiding judge. And if there's any other questions in more detail, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, thank you. That was a very complete answer, and you actually answered already several of the questions I had, but I do have another question based on what you had to say. You mentioned the court CEO and 4 commissioners. Can you tell me about the commissioners? Are they elected, appointed? What is their role?
Excellent question again. Commissioners are not elected. They are appointed, but in a different way. And just to digress for a minute, judges can become a judge either by election or by appointment by the governor. Commissioners are different. Commissioners are hired by the court. And so we, the judges, actually select our commissioners. And commissioners are considered by law to be subordinate judicial officers. And really what that means is that commissioners can't handle all of the types of cases that a Superior Court judge can. They can only handle certain limited matters, infractions, certain limited civil matters, unlawful detainer matters. So they have limited judicial functionality. They're not considered magistrates, which means that commissioners cannot review search warrants, which is something that the judges typically do. So we have 4 commissioners. They do a lot of normal work that you would think a judge would do, and they're a very hardworking group that assist us in performing our functions.
Thank you for that explanation. I was thinking on the order of like a police commissioner, so somebody who's kind of over you, but in fact that's not what the role is. So I appreciate that explanation. As presiding judge, do you handle the more complex cases? Do you take the big cases, or do you just supervise those below you or keep an eye on things of that nature?
I do have my own caseload, and currently what that is I handle all of the settlement conferences for the civil division. And what that means is any civil case that's filed comes before me for potential settlement. And my job, of course, is to settle as many cases as I can so that, we're not overburdened with conducting jury trials in civil. But as the presiding judge in Ventura County, the presiding judge typically won't engage in things like jury trials. And the reason for that is because it would take me away too much of the day from emergency matters that come up and need to be dealt with. So before I became the presiding judge, I had been trying cases and conducting jury trials for about 15 years. And in fact, I've done over 500 jury trials. And I stopped doing them when I took over as PJ because I really need to be available. And when I'm doing settlement conferences, I can be reached when there's an emergency issue that needs to be dealt with. So in our county, the PJ does continue to do regular work. In a larger county like, let's say, Los Angeles, The PJ down in Los Angeles, this is a full-time job. They would simply be doing their managerial PJ duties pretty much all day.
I see. So you mentioned that, you know, your peers elected you to be the PJ. So how long is a term for a PJ? Is it a year? Is it longer or indefinite?
It is 2 years. It's a 2-year term. Again, this is all by operation of law. And my 2-year term began in January. So I'm just about 6 months into my term at this time.
And originally, when you were appointed, were you appointed to the bench, or were you, and if you were, is it not true that later you have to run for election? Is that the way it works with the judges?
Yes, answer to both of your questions is yes and yes. So I was appointed, and that is the most common way attorneys become judges. And just to kind of back up and start, maybe I can address the qualifications to become a judge. So in California, you have to be a practicing attorney for 10 years before you can seek to become a judge. Most attorneys become a judge by way of appointment. And again, that's appointment by the governor's office. The other way you can become a judge is by direct election. However, as you alluded to, even though you may be appointed to become a judge, you have to stand for election thereafter. So once you are appointed, from then on, roughly every 6 years, you stand for election, meaning that the voters have a say. If they want to, have someone else take your seat, someone can run against you, and you are up for election. So it's kind of a hybrid process. And it's different, and it's sometimes confusing to citizens because the federal system, as most people know, is appointment for life, right? The Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. Federal trial judges are appointed for life. In California, we don't have that. We have a system where even when you're appointed, you still have to stand for election every 6 years.
Thank you. We're going to get back to standing for election in a few minutes, but I had a question about, do you have to, to whom do you report? Do you report to the state attorney general, or do you have anybody above you that you have to report to?
Well, I always like to say I have to report to the voters, which is true, right? I have to stand for election every 6 years. And I think that's important for judges to have that in mind. We are responsible to the voters, and we stand for potential election every 6 years. In addition to that, in a sense, my rulings are reviewed by the Court of Appeal, right? I'm a Superior Court judge, and there are branches of our judicial system above me, two in particular, the Court of Appeal and then the California Supreme Court. So they review my decisions just like they do any other Superior Court judge. And so in that sense, I'm accountable to the higher appellate courts. And in a sense, I'm also accountable to my colleagues who elected me to be the presiding judge. But there isn't a specific person as the PJ that I report to other than the branches of government that I just indicated.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. You mentioned that there's, the 29 judges, the 4 commissioners, hundreds of court employees, and the court CEO. I imagine the court CEO is the one who deals with the budget and things of that nature. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Our court system, like court systems throughout California, are very big organizations with lots of wheels turning. And it's really impossible for any particular judge or even the judges generally to manage the workings of the court. And so the court CEO, our CEO is Brenda McCormick, handles that directly and primarily, that being the management of the court employees other than the judges and bench officers, the workings of the budget. We have a chief financial officer, Robert Sherman, that spends 24/7 on the court's budget. Our yearly budget is approximately $65 million. And so, yes, as judges and as the PJ, we are entirely dependent on our administrative staff to run the normal workings of the courthouse.
And how is the court funded? Is it through taxes, county taxes, state taxes, special districts, or
It is, the court's budget comes out of the general fund. So the legislature decides what the court's budget is. That comes out of the general fund. What feeds the general fund are a myriad of sources, taxpayer dollars, probably some fines and fees and all sorts of different revenue streams. But our budget comes from the general fund that's established by the legislature.
Thank you. What would you say the challenges of your office are?
My office, just as Superior Court Judge, as PJ, or both?
Both. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as a Superior Court Judge, you know, we're in what we like to call the conflict resolution business. When you think about what we're engaged in, is we're constantly dealing with disputes and trying to resolve them in the fairest way. They may be criminal disputes where someone is charged with a crime and contesting whether they're guilty or not. They may be a civil dispute where, you know, someone's in an auto accident, or maybe someone is subject to potential medical malpractice. So we deal with those disputes. And we deal with family law disputes, right? People get divorced. People have child custody disputes as a part of divorce. So all of us in the various departments of the courthouse, in some form or another, are dealing with conflict resolution. And so for us, I think it's important to always be aware that the people coming into the courthouse are probably dealing with the most stressful things, or one of the most stressful things in their life. And it's really important to keep that in mind, because it is a job for us, but the stakes are high, and the impact and effect of a judge's rulings on people's lives are very significant. You know, when you're deciding who gets the children, what the custody is, or when you're doing a sentencing, whether you're going to sentence someone to, you know, prison for a potential crime that they may have been convicted for. You know, these are very high stakes poker decisions. And so what's important and necessary is to always be aware of the ramifications of your decision as a judge, because it affects a lot of people, including crime victims, which we haven't talked about. And we have a lot of crime victims that are connected to cases that come in the courthouse that need to be made whole, that need justice, that need closure, that need finality. And, you know, you can't lose your compassion and your empathy for a minute as a judge. You always have to be gauging the people who are appearing before you. And there's always a myriad of people. There may be the accused, there may be the prosecutor, there may be the victim, there may be the jurors in your courtroom who are having to sort out this evidence and decide guilt or innocence. And so you're constantly needing to be vigilant and pay attention to all of the various players to make sense, to make sure that everybody is not only feeling as if justice is being administered, but actually feeling that the environment is fair and even-handed. And so it's a challenge, and it's something that you just have to keep vigilant about. As the PJ, you know, my added challenge is, you know, I have to manage, in a sense, 29, 30 elected officials, right? Every single one of my colleagues, every single one of the Superior Court judges is an elected official. And, you know, and they have their own independence, right? They have the right to make whatever decisions they think are appropriate in their own courtroom. And so I have to be respectful about that. But at the same time, I am entrusted with the responsibility to decide their assignments, where they go, whether they're the supervisor or not. And so it's a challenge when you have elected officials who are the people that you are sort of managing, in a sense. And that's different than in other businesses. You know, in a business, you don't have elected officials that you're working with. And in most governmental entities, there's just one elected official. Like if you take the sheriff's department or the district attorney's office, there is just one elected official in those two branches of government, right? There's one sheriff and one DA, unlike in the court, where there's me, and then there's 29 or 30 elected officials that work with me. So it's challenging, but we are a very collegial group. We get along. We're a good bench, and that helps it. That helps us all work well together.
That does sound challenging. Back to that, making the judicial assignments. You mentioned that, you know, you have several divisions: criminal, civil, and so on. Do you try, or what is your goal? Is your goal that the judges stay and become expert in one particular area, or is it that they move around and they get experience in all of the different divisions? And how do the judges respond to that? I mean, do they give you a grief about that, or do they like moving around?
That's what I'd call a very good inside baseball question, because you've hit on the head of the conundrum. In part is, do you allow judges to specialize and let them stay in an area for their whole career, or do you require that they cross train in some way? And there's pluses and minuses. I mean, obviously, you do need judges that are experts in particular areas. Law has become like medicine. I mean, just like it's difficult to be a general practitioner, we have heart specialists and cancer specialists and so forth. The law really necessitates that too. So it's not like it may have been 50 years ago, where as a judge, you could be a jack of all trades. And so we do need to allow for specialization. Criminal has become specialized, as has family law and civil. In civil, we get these very complex class action suits. That is not something that you want to be doing, the first time. It takes time to develop expertise in it. When I was in criminal, I did a lot of high-end criminal cases, and criminals become very complicated. I mean, you have courses and dedicated to death penalty training just for judges in criminal that are willing or able to do those type of cases. But to answer your question is, to some extent, I leave it up to the judges. There are judges that, they may want to only stay in criminal or family law. In other words, they may have been a criminal attorney or a family law attorney, and so when they get on the bench, they want to stay in that area. And that is helpful. The bar of criminal bar, family law bar does want judges that have a particular expertise in that area. So I go with the punches, roll with the punches. And what I mean by that is, I'm happy to let judges establish an expertise in an area and stay in that area, unless and until we may need someone in another department. Now, some judges will voluntarily cross-train, like I just happen to be one of them. I'm a hybrid in the sense that I was a DA for 10 years, then I went into private practice and I did civil and criminal defense, and then I got on the bench. I started out in family law, which was new for me. And then I went to criminal for about 7 years. And then after 7 years in criminal, I made the request to go to civil. And I've been in civil for roughly the last 6 years or so. And that cross-training, in other words, my having done family law, criminal, and civil, I think helps me to be a better presiding judge, because I understand those departments, I think, better, because I was a judge in each one of those departments. And so when I'm talking to my family law, civil, or criminal judges, I think I can understand their concerns and their needs maybe a little bit better because I was a judge in each of those departments.
Thank you. I can see how that would be the case. Absolutely. We have a question here. How can you summarize the changes of Ventura County Superior Court since the state constitution changed to allow the merging of municipal with superior courts?
Yes, good question. I believe it was back, let me look at my notes here. I believe it was back in 1998, sorry. 1998, the California voters passed a voter initiative that provided for a unification of the superior and municipal courts. And what does that mean? Well, prior to unification, we kind of had two separate trial courts. We had the municipal court and the superior court. And the municipal court judges did lower level cases. They did infractions and misdemeanors and lower level civil cases. And the superior court judges did the more serious cases, in particular, felony criminal matters. And that distinction was abolished with unification. So this distinction of, two levels of judges at the trial level went away with unification, including, went away in Ventura County. And now we don't have that distinction. We don't have judges that just do, misdemeanors and superior court judges that do felonies. We're all Superior Court judges. There is no longer a thing as a municipal court judge. The other distinction is the muni court judges had limited roles in the terms of the workings of the court as well. So unification changed all that. It also extended the term. There was a shorter term period for muni court judges. Now we all serve 6-year terms, right? Remember I had mentioned earlier how we stand for election every 6 years. That's now true for all of us. It wasn't true prior to unification. And then there was kind of a budget part of this that's often overlooked. You know, prior to unification, meaning prior to 1998, 99, our budget, the court's budget, was established by the Board of Supervisors here in the county of Ventura. And we being the judges, used to be able to talk with them and interact with them about our budgetary needs. And when unification happened, that took budgetary control away from the local level, away from the Board of Supervisors, and brought it up to the state level. So now our budget's all set in Sacramento before the legislature. You could argue maybe we don't have as much direct input in that anymore because we're not funded at the local level, but that's another significant change that unification brought about.
That does seem like a significant change. Yes, you mentioned the 6-year terms, and I'm assuming that the judges are all staggered. They don't all come for re-election at the same time. They have staggered elections. Thank you.
That is correct. Yeah, and so, you know, because we come on the bench at different times, and so every 2 years you'll typically see some percentage of our Superior Court judges up for election, but not all of us. Usually it's about maybe 25% per election cycle.
Thank you. So as a league in Ventura County, one of the most asked questions we have during election time is, how do voters know how to vote for a judge? You know, how do we assess to vote to retain them or not? Do you have any guidance on that? Because that is a much asked question.
Yeah. I do generally, and I empathize with it because, you know, before I was an attorney, I remember voting, and, you know, I remember going into the ballot, and most of you will identify this, and you look at all the people up for election, you know, whether it's the school board member or judges, and the reality is many voters are seeing these names for the first time, right? And I mean, although we'd like voters to research everybody who's on the ballot, the reality is they may go into the voting booth and have very limited information. And you know what the experts tell us in these smaller elections, and by smaller elections I mean local elections, including Superior Court judges and local officials, the experts tell us that, you know, people are looking at, you know, the name of the candidate and the candidate's ballot designation, and maybe they flip to the back of the voter guide and read the candidate's statement and see who's endorsing the candidate, right? And that's typically the universe of information that voters are limited to when they vote. So, you know, the ballot designation is what appears under the name of the candidate. Mm-hmm. And for a judge, it could say Superior Court judge if it's an incumbent that's up for election, or if it's someone running for a vacant seat or running against an incumbent judge, it could say attorney at law or whatever. So people are going to be looking at that, and then they're potentially going to be looking at the voter ballot information. I think if people want to get informed more, what they should be interested in looking at is how did the local and state bar rate the judicial candidates? You know, we have a local bar. It's comprised of attorneys that practice in Ventura County, that obviously appear in front of judges, that obviously know judges, and obviously know the other attorneys in the community who may be deciding to run to become a judge. And those the local bar and state bar, they evaluate judicial candidates. They do a rating. They may rate a candidate qualified, very qualified, unqualified. And if they find corroborated negatives about a candidate, they will make a finding regarding that. So, you know, one thing I think voters could consider is, how did the local bar or state bar rate a judicial candidate? Did they find any negatives that were corroborated against that candidate? And they typically disclose that. They call it a Jenny evaluation, JNE. The local bar typically discloses their rating and ranking, shortly before an election. So I think that's additional information that voters can consider. Additionally, as I mentioned, I think that they should be looking for the candidate's statement, which may or may not be there. Candidates don't have to submit a statement, and just so we're clear on that, when you get that voter guide, the candidate statements are in the back, the very back. And the reason I say they're not always there is a candidate has to decide whether to pay for it, which in Ventura is going to cost you about 10 grand to do a candidate statement. But that's something voters probably should look for. And when they are looking at that candidate statement, if the candidate decided to pay for it, they want to be looking at the bio of the candidate. What area of law did this person practice in? Who are they endorsed by? Are they endorsed by people that a voter thinks is significant? Are they endorsed by, members of the bench? There's only one election that judges can endorse in, and that is a judicial election. Like I can't endorse, and no Superior Court judge can endorse a DA candidate or a sheriff candidate or a chief of police candidate. But we judges can endorse judicial candidates. And so that might be another consideration that voters are looking at. Did the judges of the Ventura Superior Court endorse or not endorse a judicial candidate? And also, does the candidate possess the ethics, objectivity, and impartiality that's necessary to be a judge? But it is harder for voters to get information about local elections. You know what I mean? It's much harder. Even if you go on the web and start, running searches, you're not going to find too much, but you certainly can reach out to the local and state bar to try and get information about candidates.
Oh, thank you. That's a good source. The League has what's called Voter's Edge, which is a nonpartisan information for voters about the different candidates and also the issues. And so when people call, we can't endorse anybody either. We cannot oppose or support a particular candidate, but we refer our people asking questions to Voter's Edge or Ballotpedia. But when people were calling me asking about the judges and I went to those sites, there was really very little on either of the Ballotpedia, which is also a nonpartisan site, or Voter's Edge. Perhaps we can send some information to you and you can make your judges running for election aware of that site.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
That would be great. We have, across the country, we hear about judges across the nation appearing to act in a partisan manner in some cases. Do you see this as being a problem in Ventura County or in California in general, or is it not a problem that you've noticed?
In Ventura County, I would honestly say it's not a problem. There may be a couple of reasons for that. Number one, as trial court judges, we're not in the position of creating law or establishing decisions regarding, some of these controversial issues, whether it deals with firearms or a woman's right to choose. I mean, these are all decisions made at a much higher appellate level, right? Typically the U.S. Supreme Court. So we don't typically get drawn into a lot of the controversial issues that you see at the federal level or the Supreme Court level. And I can honestly tell you that we have not seen, partisan divide or partisan problems in the Ventura Superior Court. But, we're aware, like, I'm sure all of you are, of a lot of the debate going on in the community about whether the higher courts, in particular the United States Supreme Court, has or has not become partisan or not. And we're obviously seeing what everybody else is seeing in the media about, controversies and debates about some of the recent Supreme Court decisions that have come down. But easy for us to say at the lowly Superior Court judge level, those are not issues that come before us to decide, and that keeps us out of the fray.
Thank you for that. Judge, is there anything you would like to just add before we open it up to questions from our attendees?
Not much other than, I'd like to tell you that, we have a really good bench. We have a lot of hardworking judges. We have one of the highest case to bench officer ratios in the state. And what that means is that, our judges are carrying a higher volume of cases than most judges in the state. We've got a collegial bench. And, we really pride ourselves on trying to administer justice. And as the PJ, as the presiding judge, I do want to invite input from anybody listening. I want to help make this court better. If there's things that we can do that anybody thinks we can do, I'm an open door. Anybody can email me, contact me, call me. And I always try and see the court from the outside perspective. When you work inside the court, you always run the danger of not being able to see how an ordinary citizen experiences walking into the courthouse and dealing with the case. So I always want to hear that. I always want to hear the outside view so that if there's anything that can be done to improve our court, we work on it. But other than that, no, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. This has really been a great, I've appreciated all the information you've given to us. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Patterson, who's going to facilitate the question and answer. Thank you so much, Judge.
You bet.
Yes, thank you so much. That was an amazing amount of information about an area that I knew nothing. So that was quite informative. I want to ask our attendees, if they have questions, please put them in the chat. I have 3 or 4 questions that I'm going to present, but please go ahead and add more questions if you think of more questions. First of all, there was a question about whether judges are required to have any ongoing or continuing periodic education, like physicians have ongoing medical education. Is there the same requirement for judges?
Yes, absolutely. Similar to what attorneys go through, they have MCLE training that they're required to do. We are as well. That includes ethics training. And anytime you're shifted or moved into a new assignment, like let's say you're moved from criminal to family law, you have to go through mandatory family law training, which is typically done by judges at the state level that are experts in it. So we have mandatory training, including ethics training, and training for every substantive area of law that a judge ends up being assigned to handle. And then as a PJ, there's actually presiding judge training that I had to go to and will continue to have to go to. So the answer to that is yes, absolutely.
So you mentioned ethics, and there is a question about, as a presiding judge, are you responsible for overseeing the ethics of the other judges since they're elected? Or is it the voters that are responsible for that? Or do you have some role in overseeing the ethical behavior?
I do in this sense. If, as the presiding judge, if I become aware of ethical misconduct committed by a judge, a commissioner, or a temporary judge, I am obligated to take action. So if I become aware, but just to back up, we have a whole body or canon of ethics as to what we can and can't do. We could spend an hour talking about what judges can and can't do. And if I become aware as the presiding judge that another bench officer or judge has committed ethical misconduct, I have to take corrective action. Now, that could be, depending upon the severity of the misconduct, it could be anything from simply admonishing the judge about it, or if it's severe, I might be required to report that to the Commission on Judicial Performance.
Okay, that's good to know. One of the other questions here is, when presiding over the complex cases, do judges confer with their fellow judges, or do they rely on their staff for additional guidance or information to help them make those judicial decisions?
Yes, in a sense. In other words, in civil in particular, we have, and every court has, research attorneys. Again, because the law has become like medicine, very complicated, research attorneys will often help judges work up an analysis of a particular thorny issue. And so in some sense, judges are getting input from internal research attorneys. And then we will talk with each other. I mean, I've had many conversations with colleagues where I may have a tough legal issue or I'm dealing with, and I'll talk and bounce it off a colleague, one way or the other. So yeah, we talk with each other and we get input from our research attorneys. What we do not do and cannot do is talk with private attorneys, right? We don't go out and start talking to people we used to practice law with. We're prohibited from speaking with anybody outside of the court about any case pending before us, any controversy or any legal issue that we're going to decide. And in a sense, that's kind of cuts into your social life a little bit because everybody wants to talk to a judge about, some pending case, right? Whenever there's a very, significant case in the media, my family and friends always want to ask me about it. And I have to politely tell them, sorry, I can't give you my opinion about that case because I'm prohibited by the code of conduct.
Excellent. That's reassuring to know that. There's a question here about, is there any kind of a minimum of education or experience for a person who decides they want to come for or run for election as a judge?
Yes. So first you'd have to become an attorney, and to do that, right, you got to go through college and go to law school. And then after you graduate from law school, you have to take the bar exam and become an attorney. And then you have to practice for a minimum of 10 years. Once you've done all those things, then you can seek to become a judge, either again by way of appointment or by running for election. But in terms of like, what is there any specific things beyond that? There isn't. I mean, as long as you meet those minimum criteria, you can seek to become a judge. Now, there's a huge vetting process on the appointment side, where the bar is looking into candidates and the governor's offices. I mean, I get calls from the governor's appointment secretary, who is, by the way, Luis Cespedes, and he is, the person that has the governor's ear, so to speak. And he's the person that is, vetting and making recommendations to the governor as to who should be appointed. And so I'll typically get calls from the governor's appointment secretary, and he will ask me about attorneys. Do you know this attorney? Do you know that attorney? What do you think? What's their reputation in the community? So I mean, there's a lot of that happening, but technically for someone to seek to become a judge, it's practice law for 10 years and you can seek.
So that actually leads into one of the other questions that we have here, which is when a judge or when someone is running for election, whether it's to be reappointed because they've been appointed and be reelected, do they give their party affiliation on the ballot?
I don't believe so. No, we are considered non-political. And so we don't use party affiliations associated with us. That's feeds into part of our, supposed neutrality and impartiality. Sometimes that's an effort. I mean, obviously, judges are going to have political leanings, right? I mean, there may be judges who vote more Democrat or judges who vote more Republican, but we don't wear on our sleeve our party affiliation or preferences.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so this is a different kind of a question. When a person or case loses their case,
Mm-hmm.
Who do they appeal to? Do they appeal to, let's see, if they have a Ventura County case, what are the levels that it goes up? And has one ever reached the Supreme Court?
Yeah. This is another one of these depend answers. In other words, where does your case go when you appeal? It depends on the type of case it is. So if it's a misdemeanor or infraction that someone was convicted of, their appeal would go to the Superior Court Appellate Department, which is actually a group of Superior Court judges. And I used to be on that appellate panel. However, if it's a felony case, then it goes to the Court of Appeal. If it's a typical civil case, an unlimited civil case, it goes to the Court of Appeal. So I don't mean to confuse anybody, but it does depend on the type of case you have as to where it goes when you appeal it. So one way to think of it is lower level cases typically would go to the Superior Court Appellate Department. The more significant cases would go up to the Court of Appeal. And then from there, after the Court of Appeal makes a decision, right, the Court of Appeal can affirm the lower level court or reverse the lower level court. Then you can appeal or petition for review to the California Supreme Court. And then you theoretically, if there's a federal issue at stake in the case, and that's what you need to get into federal court, if after you're done pursuing your relief all the way up through the state court system, right, you've litigated at the Superior Court level, Court of Appeal level, California Supreme Court level, if there is a federal constitutional type issue in that case, you can then seek review in the federal court system. And it's got a similar tier system to it. You go to the federal district court level, and then the appellate level, and then potentially the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court takes the case. And yes, we have had cases from Ventura County go all the way up through the state system and all the way up through the federal system and make it to the United States Supreme Court. That's pretty rare for that to happen, because the Supreme Court, doesn't take that many cases, but it has happened.
Okay, great. Looks like we maybe have time for one more question, and there's a question specifically about the commissioners. Where do the commissioners operate? Are they in the courtroom, or do they have a separate place that they work from?
Good question. We have 4 commissioners, as I mentioned, and they work in a courtroom just like us judges. You wouldn't notice any difference. If you walked into a courtroom with a commissioner, they're going to be sitting on the bench with a black robe on and, dealing with cases just like a judge would. In our courthouse, you'll see commissioners typically in courtroom 10 and 11. Courtroom 10 deals with traffic matters, which includes traffic infractions and misdemeanors. And a lot of the courtroom 10 calendar are DUI cases that are there for arraignment. So you'll see our commissioners handling the DUI arraignments in courtroom 10. And then in courtroom 11, you'll typically see commissioners there handling non-traffic misdemeanors. Okay, these would be misdemeanor criminal offenses other than those involving motor vehicles, right? Maybe a misdemeanor battery charge or something like that. And then we have commissioners that handle small claims matters, right? And infraction trials. Like if somebody wants to contest a speeding citation they got, or they ran a stop sign, one of those minor issues, they're typically going to be heard by a commissioner. So they'll end up in front of a commissioner, and the commissioner will have the citizen there and the officer there and listen to the testimony of both and decide, whether guilt or not guilt. And then the small claims cases that commissioners hear, those are minor cases that involve a damage amount or money amount of $10,000 or less, and those can be heard by commissioners, right? Because they're small matters, and those are non-jury trial type civil cases, so they don't go to a jury trial. They're kind of heard like a traffic ticket. They're heard in front of a commissioner, and so that's where you'll see our commissioners handling cases.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have come to the end of our questions in the chat. If anyone else has a question that they would like to submit, now is the time to do it, because otherwise, I'm going to just say thank you very much for taking all this time to meet with us today and providing us with this important information. As Kathy said, we get questions all the time about how do we assess our judges and what do they do? How do I know what a Superior Court judge does? So this has been very, very informative, and we're hoping that our membership will take the opportunity of watching the recording of this on our YouTube channel. So we appreciate your being here. And at this point, I don't see her video yet, but Patty Chan is going to make a few closing remarks. In the meantime, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, if there's any other questions that come up, today, tomorrow, down the road, always feel free, any of you listening, to contact me. I'm happy to answer questions that I can. And I get it. I mean, we really want to do our best as a bench to help the public and help all of you be informed. And we're public servants, so I'm here to answer questions that anyone has.
So there is one more question, but I think I can answer this question. The question is, do we have good public defenders available? And I cannot imagine you saying no.
Yeah, we do. We have great public defenders and great prosecutors. Both the two offices. I mean, when I was in private practice, I went around the state, and I'm telling you, our public defender's office and our district attorney's office have great attorneys in them, and they litigate cases very strenuously and professionally. So answer is yes.
Great. Okay, I see Patty has shown up, and so I will turn the meeting over to her for some closing remarks.
Hi, again, thank you very much. This was really informative, and I know everyone will gain a lot from it. So in closing, I would like to remind everyone that next Wednesday, we will be having our meeting at the same time and place, and we will be hearing from Dr. Cesar Morales. He is our Ventura County Superintendent of Schools. As a reminder, recordings of this session and all future ones will be available. Please go to the League of Women Voters website to access the link to the recording. Thank you again to everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. This concludes today's presentation. Have a nice afternoon.